When people meet me now, they always say the same thing. "Ma'am, you don't look 88." I usually laugh because I know what they're really asking. They want a secret, a trick, a miracle. But my life didn't start with secrets. It started with hunger. My name is Loretta Mae Johnson, and I was born in the Deep South in the late 1930s. We were so poor that poor didn't even feel like the right word. We were thin poor, quiet poor, the kind of poor where you learn not to complain because it doesn't change what's in the pantry. Some nights my mama would stretch a pot of beans so far it tasted like water with hope in it. My brothers and I slept two to a bed, and in winter we layered clothes like blankets because the house couldn't keep the cold out. But my mama had a habit that stuck with me like a hymn. Whenever she could find them, when the season was right, when somebody at church shared, when a neighbor had extra, she brought home fruit, not candy, not cake, fruit. And she'd cut it up slow at the table like it was something precious. She'd say, "Baby, this is God's sweetness. Eat it and let your body thank you later." I didn't understand what she meant then. All I knew was fruit felt like a celebration. It was color in a life that was mostly gray. Years went by. I grew up, worked hard, raised children, carried worries the way women do, quietly while still showing up for everybody else. Then in my 70s, I noticed something. I was getting tired in a way that didn't feel normal. Not sick, just worn down. My skin looked dull. My joints felt stiffer. My energy didn't bounce back the way it used to. And I thought of my mama at that kitchen table. I thought of the way she treated fruit like medicine without ever calling it that. So I went back to what I knew. I started eating 3 fruits regularly, the same ones that always showed up in my life when times were hard, the ones that made me feel like my body had a little sunlight inside it. And I'm telling you, I felt a change. Not overnight, not like magic, but steady, real, like my body remembered how to come back to itself. People call it rejuvenation. I just call it feeling alive again. The first fruit is the one my mama could almost always find, even when we had little else, and it might be the simplest one of all. The first fruit was the banana. Now I know bananas don't sound glamorous. Folks hear rejuvenating, and they picture some rare berry from the mountains or a powder that costs $50 a jar. But in my childhood, bananas were one of the only sweet things that ever showed up without a holiday attached to it. Sometimes my mama would come home with just 2 bananas for 5 kids, and you've never seen a woman slice a banana so thin in your life. She'd cut it into little coins and lay them across our oatmeal like she was decorating a cake. We didn't complain. We learned gratitude early. Because bananas meant you were getting something your body could actually use. Something that didn't just fill your belly, but helped you keep going. When I got older and started working, first cleaning houses, then later in a nursing home kitchen, I noticed the same thing. The days I ate a banana, I didn't feel as shaky or empty by mid-morning. My energy stayed steadier. My mood stayed softer. So in my 70s, when I started feeling run down, bananas were the first thing I returned to. Here's how I did it. Nothing fancy. Most mornings I ate 1 banana, plain or sliced into yogurt if I had it. If money was tight that week, it was just the banana. I didn't force anything. I just made it a regular part of life again. And after a few weeks, I noticed changes that were small, but real. I wasn't as constipated. My legs cramped less at night. My afternoons didn't feel like I was dragging a sack of bricks behind me, but the biggest change was in my face. One day my neighbor, Miss Pearl, leaned close while we were talking outside and said, "Loretta, your skin looks like it's waking up." That's exactly what it felt like. Not like I became 20 again. I'm not going to lie to you, but like the dullness lifted a little, like my body was saying, "Oh, we're taking care of ourselves again." When you grow up poor, you learn to ignore your body's little signals because there's always something more urgent: work, bills, kids, survival. But the older I got, the more I realized those small signals are your body whispering for help. And the banana was my first yes to that whisper. Still, bananas were only one piece. The second fruit is the one that really surprised me because it wasn't something we always had as kids. We only got it when somebody was feeling sick or when Mama wanted to build the blood back up. And even now, at 88, I don't go long without it. The second fruit that slowly brought my energy back was the orange. Now, where I grew up, oranges weren't something we had every week. They were a little more special. Usually, someone at church would bring a bag, or the school would give one out during winter when everybody seemed to be catching colds. My mama believed in oranges the way some folks believe in medicine. Whenever one of us children got sick, she would sit by the bed with a small bowl and peel an orange slowly. The smell would fill the room before you even tasted it. She'd hand us the slices and say, "Eat this, baby. This will wake your body back up." At the time, I thought it was just something sweet to help us feel better. But years later, I realized she probably knew more than we gave her credit for. When I reached my 70s and started feeling run down, oranges became part of my daily routine again. Almost every afternoon, I peeled one orange and ate it slowly. Not while watching television, not while rushing around the kitchen, just sitting quietly, enjoying it. Something about that simple habit made a difference. First thing I noticed was my energy in the afternoon. Before that, around 3 o'clock, I used to feel like the day was already over. My body felt heavy and my mind slowed down. But after a couple weeks of eating that orange each day, that heavy feeling started fading. It was like a small light switched back on inside me. Then there was my skin. Now, at my age, you expect wrinkles. I'm not trying to hide that. But the dryness I used to feel in my face and hands began improving. My skin felt softer, less dull. Miss Pearl noticed again one day. She said, "Loretta, I don't know what you're doing, but your face got some shine back to it." I laughed and told her the truth. "Girl, it's just fruit." The other thing oranges did was help my immune system. For years, I used to catch every little cold that came through the neighborhood. But once I started eating oranges regularly, I noticed something strange. Those winter sniffles didn't bother me as much anymore. Again, I'm not claiming it's magic, but our bodies need real nutrients, and oranges carry a lot of what an aging body still depends on. By that time, I was already feeling stronger. Bananas in the morning, an orange in the afternoon. But the third fruit, that one changed things in a deeper way, because it reminded me of my childhood more than anything else. It was the fruit that grew wild near the dirt road where we used to play as children. And even now, at 88, I still call it the fruit that gives me my glow. The third fruit that became part of my life again was berries, not the fancy kind you see in expensive stores today. I mean the small wild berries that used to grow along the dirt road near our house when I was a little girl. Back then, we didn't call them superfoods. We didn't talk about antioxidants or vitamins. We just knew they were sweet, colorful, and made our tongues turn purple. In the summertime, my brothers and I would walk down that dusty road carrying old tin cups. Along the fence lines and bushes, you could find blackberries growing wild. Some days we picked enough to fill our cups, and some days we ate them right there before we even made it home. Mama always smiled when she saw those purple stains on our fingers. She'd say, "Well, at least y'all eating something good today." Years later, when I was in my 70s and trying to bring my energy back, I started buying berries whenever I could afford them. Most weeks it was blueberries or blackberries. I didn't eat a lot, just a small bowl in the evening after dinner. But something about those berries did something special for my body. First, I noticed my digestion improved. I didn't feel as heavy after meals. My stomach felt calmer, like things were moving the way they should. Then I noticed something even more surprising. My mind felt clearer. Now, when you get older, you expect your memory to slow down a little. But after a few months of eating berries regularly, I found myself remembering small things more easily again. Names, phone numbers, little details from conversations. It wasn't like turning the clock backward, but it felt like my brain had been dusted off a little. My granddaughter once told me that berries are full of natural compounds that help protect the brain and the body from aging. I don't pretend to understand all the science behind it, but I do know this. When I added berries to my routine with bananas and oranges, my body started feeling lighter, brighter, and more awake. Banana in the morning, orange in the afternoon, berries in the evening. 3 simple fruits. And slowly, week by week, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years, like my body still had life left to give. When I first started eating those 3 fruits regularly again, bananas, oranges, and berries, I wasn't thinking about looking younger. At my age, you don't chase youth. You chase feeling good in your own body. But after about 3 months, people around me began noticing things I hadn't even paid attention to yet. One Sunday morning at church, one of the younger women stopped me near the door. She looked at my face for a moment and said, "Miss Loretta, you look different." I laughed and said, "Different how, baby?" She said, "I don't know. Brighter." Now, when someone tells you that at 88 years old, you listen. So I went home that afternoon and stood in front of the mirror for a while. I still saw my wrinkles. Those aren't going anywhere. But I also noticed something I hadn't seen in a long time. My skin looked alive again. Not dry, not dull, just healthier. The other change I noticed was my energy in the mornings. For years, I had been waking up slowly, like my body needed a long time to start moving. But after adding those fruits back into my daily routine, I started waking up with a little more readiness, not jumping out of bed like a teenager, but ready enough to make coffee, open the window, and start the day without feeling heavy. The most important change, though, was something deeper. My mood improved. When people grow older, loneliness can creep in quietly. The house gets quieter. Friends move away or pass on. Days sometimes feel longer than they used to. But taking care of my body again, even in such a simple way, reminded me that I was still here, still living, still worth caring for. And every time I peeled that orange or washed those berries, it felt like I was honoring the same lesson my mama taught me all those years ago at that kitchen table. Take care of the body God gave you. Not with expensive things, not with complicated rules, just with simple, honest food. By the time I turned 80, those 3 fruits had become something I didn't even think about anymore. They were just part of the day. Banana in the morning, orange in the afternoon, berries in the evening. Simple. But something else started happening as the years went on. My doctor visits became easier. I've always been honest with my doctor. I tell him exactly what I eat, what I don't eat, and what habits I keep. One day during a routine checkup, he looked at my chart, then looked back at me and said, "Miss Johnson, whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I laughed and told him the truth. "I eat fruit, doctor." He smiled and said something I remember clearly. A lot of people forget that the body still needs real food, especially as we age. Now, fruit alone didn't give me my whole life. I also stayed active. I walked whenever I could. I kept my mind busy reading, talking with neighbors, spending time with my grandchildren. But those three fruits were like small helpers for my body every single day. The banana helped me start the morning with steady energy. The orange lifted me through the afternoon. The berries gave my body something gentle and nourishing in the evening. And slowly, over the years, people kept noticing little things. My skin didn't look as dry as many women my age. My digestion stayed steady. My mind stayed sharp enough to remember stories from 50 years ago. Of course, life still had its hardships. Friends passed away. My husband died when I was 76. There were lonely evenings, quiet rooms, and days when memories felt heavy. But even during those seasons, I kept that small habit. Because caring for your body is also a way of caring for your spirit. And every time I washed those berries or peeled that orange, I felt a small connection back to my childhood, back to my mama's voice in that tiny kitchen. "Eat it, baby. Let your body thank you later." By the time I reached my mid-80s, something interesting started happening. Younger women in my neighborhood began asking me questions, not the polite kind, the curious kind. They would stop me outside the grocery store or after church and say things like, "Miss Loretta, what do you eat?" At first, I thought they were joking. But one afternoon, my granddaughter brought two of her friends over, and they sat at my kitchen table looking at me like I had some kind of secret. One of them finally said, "You're 88 and your skin still glows." I laughed so hard I had to wipe tears from my eyes, because nobody who grows up poor ever expects to hear that sentence. I told them the same truth I've told you. No secrets, baby, just fruit. Then I walked them through my little routine. Morning, banana; afternoon, orange; evening, berries. 3 fruits. Nothing fancy, no powders, no expensive supplements. Just food that comes from the earth the way God made it. They looked disappointed at first, like they were hoping I would say something mysterious. But then one of them asked a smarter question. "Why do you think it works?" I sat there thinking for a moment, and the answer that came to me wasn't about vitamins or nutrients. It was about respect, respect for the body. When you grow up with very little, you learn something important early in life. Your body is the one thing you always carry with you, and the way you feed it matters. Those 3 fruits reminded my body every day that it was still worth caring for, still worth nourishing, still worth keeping strong. Maybe that's what people call a rejuvenating effect. But to me, it simply feels like my body saying, "Thank you for not forgetting me.